There is no sport where coaching changes matter more than football. On today's Move the Line, we're going to talk through all the head coaching and coordinator changes that have taken place this offseason, what to expect scheme-wise from each of those moves, and discuss any relevant handicapping implications along the way. Let's dig in. Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined here, as always, by Connor Allen and Sharp Clark. Connor, where are you these days?
Yeah, I'm out in Clark's neck of the woods here, out in Colorado. So it's nice to be hanging out there for the weekend, visiting some friends.
Nice, Clark. How we doing, buddy?
Good. Yeah, I don't know how many listeners or viewers are in Colorado, but we've had an infestation of moths this week, and so I apologize if any come flying through the screen. They're everywhere.
I tried to get Connor on the golf course, and he's gallivanting all over the country in the next couple of months leading up to the season. He's I live vicariously through as a dad with dad responsibilities. I get to experience the life of a newly married, childrenless Connor Allen and all the things that he does here over the summer, the next couple of months. So
it's wedding season, bro. I mean, it's like everyone my age is getting married. I think I have 6 or 7 weddings this year. I have 5 bachelor parties in a month. I don't even know how I'm going to be able to do that. It's going to be it's like one a weekend and then one midweek. It's going to be a complete disaster. Rest in peace to my body and liver. But we'll make it through it.
I don't know if I have 5 friends.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm not of age where a lot of my friends, other than Connor, who again is, despite appearance, significantly younger than me. That was my my wedding season last year when Connor got married. That's it. My friends just get divorced or that's the next stage of life. Not for Connor and Maggie.
Hopefully not this year.
It does unfortunately happen to people. So I wish that upon no one. We'll move on to football though. We're going to be here every week leading up to the season. Lots of original content here on our 4for4 Bets YouTube page. We've spawned off from the 4for4 football fantasy page. So subscribe means a lot to us. Lots of great content that helps, support the free content. So thumbs up on the video, subscribing goes a long way. Jump in the chat too. This week, we're going to talk about coaching changes, as we mentioned. Let us know what your favorite or least favorite coaching move of the offseason has been. We'd love to hear from you. Still available here on podcast form too, wherever you subscribe. Don't miss a show. 5 stars, thumbs up, rate and review. All those things go a long way in helping us, and we appreciate that greatly. Before we get into coaching, we've had some breaking news here in the last 30 minutes before we get started. It looks like Jimmy Garoppolo had foot surgery within the last couple of weeks, and maybe questionable to start the season, Connor. There is, again, we have some team betting aspects that we can get on the Raider side. I'll go to Clark for that. But Connor, I know we have some props available too on Garoppolo. Any thoughts on this? Again, if you can miss any time at all, probably some nice outs here in the prop market.
Yeah, it's something that I actually originally had bet prior to the draft, like a little bit myself, because I thought that there was a non-zero chance that they drafted a quarterback, in which case, like, his prop of whatever 37.50 is way off, like, if he's going to play half the season. But now at this point, we're looking at around 3,600 at Caesars, DraftKings, FanDuel. I think it's a little bit lower at 35.50. Right now, the reports are saying that there's uncertainty whether it'd be ready for week 1. And I mean, we're in May, so I don't want to go overboard here, but like generally with betting season long unders, and I'll have a big study coming out about this. If you bet the under basically on everything, 2 years ago, 63%, last year, 60%, and we're talking about like a 600 prop sample. So it's not like, that small anymore. So, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. There's so many more outs for unders. And like, if you're already giving yourself an out that you could see, which is Jimmy Garoppolo maybe missing a couple weeks, to start the season, like you're in a massive advantage here. So something I'm interested in mulling over. I don't know, Noonan, like any thoughts? I guess the only thing holding me back is like the defense could be bad. So they're going to have to throw like a bunch, but like, I mean, that's about it.
Yeah, that would be it. I wouldn't expect a massive change defensively from that team. The secondary is still pretty bad. But yeah, like you said, I mean, just straight up as is, we're on the right side by going under anyway. And if there is a chance of, missing some starts of the season or re-aggravation, it's definitely probably my lean. And I think we're going to start to continue to see that in the books. And Clark, it's Brian Hoyer on deck. They drafted Aiden O'Connor from Purdue in, I think like the 5th round or something like that. It's like, it would be Brian Hoyer stepping in here. Any starts there? Any leans on the Raiders in terms of the future market, or any thoughts on Garoppolo?
No, I mean, it makes me even more disappointed that they got rid of Stidham because he played well in those 2 games at the end of the year. And so I was really kind of hoping the Raiders would go into like, let's see what we have in Stidham. And if we fail, then we're at least get a good draft position. But instead they went to Jimmy G, which makes no sense. And now it makes even less sense. Not that they knew this was going to happen. So yeah, I'm staying away. I'm kind of biding my time. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely something to look for. You can jump in our subscriber Discord, see if there's any plays pushed out by the team here with this news as it continues to, kind of form here. It's just kind of getting this as we get started. But again, great time to scoop a betting sub at 4 for 4. It's going to get you access to everything on the sites. If you're playing best ball, you want to get our rankings, projections for the season, DFS, high stakes, everything. I mentioned the subscriber Discord, I think, is really the crown jewel of the subscription. You can get access to us. Same thing with our fantasy guys. You want to talk shop with Daigle, Paulson, TJ, any of that stuff. You can do that through Discord. And then channels for every sport. And if you also play any of the pick'em games, prize picks, underdog, no house advantage, vivid picks, we have channels and posted plays there as well. You can head over to 4for4.com/plans to get the betting subscription, or we've partnered with a couple of these pick'em sites. You can go to Vivid Picks, download the Vivid Picks app, use promo code 4for4bet. And deposit minimum of $5, and it's going to get you a 3-month sub. I laugh because I can't believe how cheap that is. And for 3 months, again, you're not going to get the full year, but as Connor and I were talking about the other day, you can stack these on top of each other. You could do 3 months of Vivid, and that expires. You want 3 more months, take you through most of football season, do it with our friends at No House Advantage. You can find all that information on the site. Again, they'll match deposit at Vivid up to $200 if you want to play over there. But if you're looking to do it just to get access to 4 for 4 betting subscription, you only need to do $5. Really, really cheap. So
yeah, quick bit too. I think it's worth noting that I actually do enjoy playing over there because like at all these pickup platforms, because they post stale lines. Their limits are not as much. You're able to correlate without like penalty quite as like, at certain times. So like, and they post lines of like week 17 last year, they posted Viking starters lines when everyone knew they were playing like a half. So it's like, I mean, it's free money. So just like, take advantage of it.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, it's been a busy offseason on the coaching front. Lots of moves to discuss, so we'll jump into it. Going to go alphabetically down the order here. Some teams had coaching changes, offensive, defensive. Some have done it all, and that's actually our first team here in Arizona, who Cliff Kingsbury era has ended, and Jonathan Gagnon is in. Defensive coordinator from Philadelphia is over as the head coach. He's brought along Drew Penzing to be his offensive coordinator, and then Nick Rowles, who is associated with him in Philadelphia, to be the defensive coordinator, though Gannon will definitely call plays here. Clark, I'll kick to you to talk about Arizona.
I have no idea what Arizona is trying to do this year. I don't know anything about the 2 coordinators, and all I know about Jonathan Gannon is that his defensive schemes have not really impressed me. It's usually pretty passive, not too creative, just kind of rely on the talent that he had or didn't have in some cases. So last year, the Eagles defense was good because they had good talent and played bad teams. I'm not sure that was anything that Jonathan Gannon did. So I'm skeptical, but I'm also recognizing that the attributes that make a good coordinator aren't necessarily the same as the ones that make a good coach. And I'm pretty open-minded about what he's going to do in Arizona. I think he's got a long leash, so that kind of gives us time to evaluate him as he gets going. But also, I just want to say, like, when handicapping coaches, because I get a question about, like, how do you incorporate coaching when you do your week-to-week handicapping? And my answer is basically like, I'm not independently evaluating coaches. I think it's really, really, really difficult to isolate what the coach brings to the table because so much of it is behind the scenes during practice. Scheme we can kind of identify, but culture building and discipline and all those kinds of things are really, really hard to extricate. And to the extent that their impact is felt in the game, it's already impacting performance. So I would expect my performance ratings to already reflect coaching. So as far as the Arizona goes, like I have very low expectations for the team. And so by proxy, I have very low expectations for Jonathan Gannon, but I'll be willing to change my mind if what I see on the field demonstrates that he has some skills that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, good call out there. Connor, not a great start in terms of like PR for Jonathan Gannon. They had a pretty nice draft and were able to manipulate some stuff to really bolster next year. Again, with the expectations being pretty low, knowing they're playing at least the majority of the season, probably at least half without Kyler Murray as he recovers from an ACL. What are your thoughts on what Arizona's done here?
Yeah, going through this process is really interesting because it kind of opens my eyes and like forces me to dig deeper on all the coaches and some of the lesser known guys. And I think we see some scenarios like this one in Arizona specifically, where you have new guys who have never called plays without a head coach that can help them. And so, like now we have Drew Petzing, who was the former tight end coach for the Browns and QB coach. And I mean, I guess is calling plays without Kyler Murray at quarterback, and he has a defensive coordinator as his head coach. So, like, if things go wrong, like, what is his crutch? Like, how is this going to work? You know, like, I'm sure that he could be good, but it's like we see some other guys where it's like, okay, the offensive coordinator can at least get help from the head coach. Like, I think, you know, Frank Reich is a great example. We'll talk about that later. You know, like, there's at least something to lean on if things aren't going as well. Here, there's nothing. Andy has nothing around him. So it's like one of those things where my expectations are getting considerably lower for the Arizona Cardinals. And so when I'm thinking about this team specifically early on in the season, I'm looking at ways to fade them potentially, like in some of the early games. So I didn't look at all the like early look ahead lines, but I mean, week one, Commanders are favored at home. I think it's -5.5. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't love the Commanders necessarily, but it's like I would need to find ways to fade this Cardinals team because I think Clark mentioned too that we really don't know who's going to be a quarterback if Kyler's not going to be there.
And the win total's already kind of been bet to shit a little bit. It's like 4.5 at this point.
Yeah,
So yeah, like fading them
Kyler
is probably best
back,
off.
Right.
What's that?
If Kyler comes back, like you could easily get sunk on the win total, like in the last 6 games of the season, 7 games of the season.
Sure.
And he might be playing for his career. Like he might be like literally, or not his career, but his time in Arizona. He might be playing for his time in Arizona. So like, I struggle to believe that they're gonna be like, oh, whatever, like sit it out, we'll tank this year. Like, I don't think that's gonna happen because he might not be in Arizona if they tank.
I think that's without question what's going on there. I mean, they're going to have their first round pick, which is again with a 4.5 win total projected to be pretty high, and they're going to have the Texans first round pick as well with that trade. So like they're set up to be looking at a couple of early draft picks, and we know we have at least 2 quarterbacks that are projected to go very, very high, if not 1-2 in next year's draft. So, you know, in terms of like the past coaching trees, and again, I think sometimes this can get a little bit noisy and it's maybe pretty thin, depending on, you know, how frequent guys have changed and who they've been working with. You know, the Gannon Penzing thing, they overlapped in Minnesota with Kevin Stefanski. And again, we know that Penzing last year was with Stefanski again in Cleveland. So, you know, Stefanski is a guy in general that I think a lot of people like, that is analytically minded and, you know, hopeful that we see some good stuff out of Penzing. But again, I don't know what the expectations are for, you know, Arizona in terms of what's a good season, what are the goals, what are they looking to accomplish this season. So definitely will be interesting to watch, especially early as Connor referenced. Atlanta, continuation with Arthur Smith, but they have made a change in defensive coordinator. Ryan Nielsen comes over. He's been in the Saints organization, basically with Dennis Allen for the last 6-7 years. And it'd be interesting to see again, how thin is the correlation between what they did in New Orleans? Is that what Nielsen's going to want to do in Atlanta? Because if it is, there's going to be a little bit of shift in terms of like man-to-man rate. New Orleans has been one of the highest teams in man-to-man rate over the last handful of years. Arizona on the other end ran very little man-to-man last year. Blitz rates are kind of the same, but in terms of single high, 2 high safety, what New Orleans and Atlanta did last year was very different. Clark, do you have any thoughts on Nielsen here coming to Atlanta?
Not much, but I'm optimistic because Atlanta's defense has been so bad in recent years, and their scheme has developed such little pressure that a lot of times people say, well, it's because they have no players that can create pressure. And maybe that's part of it. Like I said, it's hard to extricate the coach impact. But I think having a new coordinator and having all these new defensive pieces, they've got good cornerbacks, which is going to come in handy if they play a lot of man. I think at least raises the expectation for this defense because it was so low before. And we see this all the time. Teams that perform at one end or the other of performance, in this case, Atlanta's defense, tend to skew towards the middle when they get a new leader, just by the way the game works and by probabilities. Yeah.
Connor, anything to add?
Nope. We can move on there.
All right, Baltimore. You guys are both pretty bullish on Baltimore. We talked about them last, and I understand why, especially offensively. And now we have Todd Monken coming back to the NFL as the offensive coordinator. Greg Roman out. I think some of the Greg Roman stuff, I think he's probably a good offensive coordinator, but I can understand why you'd want to change. And Monken's been a guy that has been all over the place, really kind of made a name for himself when he was just letting it fly when he was in Tampa Bay with Jameis Winston, Ryan Fitzpatrick a few years back. Went to Cleveland, it didn't go so well with Baker and all, Freddie Kitchens and all that there. Has been with Georgia in college football and leading them to a couple national championships as the offensive coordinator there. Back in the NFL with Baltimore. And everything we're hearing here, Connor, in the last couple of days from Lamar Jackson, he's very, very excited. And I get it too, because Monken has been a guy that is not just air raid. He's been able to really adapt based off of his personnel, which is a fantastic sign. So talk to me about this move.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me is he's really kind of adjusted his strategy. If we look at Georgia, so Georgia obviously has been dominant the past few years with Todd Monken, an offensive coordinator. And a lot of people are like, oh, okay, well, they're attributed to talent. I mean, Stetson Bennett is their quarterback. Their offensive line is obviously very good, but none of their wide receivers are really true NFL talent. They have Brock Bowers, who is generational tight end talent, but he's a tight end, he was their leading receiver as a tight end. And so I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I think that wow, this could be a really big thing for Lamar. And some people are going to say, oh, well, Greg Roman kind of had him in not a gimmicky offense, but more of a college style. They're running a lot of read options and things of that sort. Lamar played in a pro style offense in college. I mean, this is nothing that he can't necessarily do, even though he's not necessarily viewed as a pro style quarterback. I think it's something that he's capable of doing. And given that Monken is kind of, I guess, aired towards talent maximization, and maybe he learned a lot at Georgia too. I mean, obviously they were incredible. So it's one of those things where they have more talent. They, I'm a believer in Monken's ability to kind of scheme things up for him. And like Lamar said, they're going to be doing more passing, a little less running. I mean, inevitably. I mean, Lamar has been running a ton. And I still think though that we're probably going to see still a decent amount of running design Lamar runs, because I think Monken kind of will lean into that at some points. It just maybe not as much as Greg Roman did.
Yeah, probably fewer schemed, design runs, but I still think not running would be, neglect with Lamar Jackson. Clark, talk to me about this one.
I'm excited about this impact on the offense. I mean, I remember these plays watching Greg Roman's offense where two receivers would end up in the same spot, and it happened way too frequently. And I think Todd, I went back and looked at the Bucs EPA per play and success rate back when he was coordinating that offense with Jameis Winston, and they were much better at passing than they were at running. They were a really bad running team, but they were a pretty decent passing team. And I think that, one, that's huge in the NFL. It's the most important thing. And two, we haven't seen Lamar Jackson in that kind of pass-heavy offense. So I think I'm optimistic about how it's going to play out, especially with the weapons they have. And especially looking back at being how bad Jameis Winston ended up being as a quarterback. That was the best he's played in his career, right? So he got the best out of Jameis Winston that anyone's gotten. So I think expecting Lamar Jackson to be at his best in the passing game, I think is a reasonable expectation. And I'm pretty open-minded about what that looks like.
Yeah, the ceiling here is pretty exciting, considering you're going to have a NFL, this generation of NFL type of offensive coordinator in terms of the forward pass, and then just the surrounding cast is nothing we've really seen for Lamar, with Bateman and Odell on the outside, Zay Jones, or Zay Flowers in the slot. Really exciting. I don't know what again, we should probably temper our expectations for rookies in general, especially rookie, receivers that are coming in, having to learn the NFL. But man, where Lamar is really good is over the middle of the field. We see that with Mark Andrews and Zay in this offense when they go three receivers is going to be the slot receiver. I'm excited about Zay Flowers in this offense this year. So it's going to be interesting to watch. If the defense can hold up, they're going to be really good contenders. If not, we should see some crazy fantasy outputs from Lamar in this offense. It's going to be a pretty exciting one to watch. Buffalo made the list because surprisingly, Leslie Frazier kind of just taking a year off. Just trying to find more information about it. There's just not a ton, but Sean McDermott is a defensive-minded head coach, and he'll be taking over the play calling duties. Connor, do you have anything to add to Buffalo with Sean McDermott? No new coach, but basically Frazier out.
Not really. I think it'll probably look pretty similar. I don't know, Clark, any dramatic changes there? For me, it's kind of the same. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leslie Frazier is a well-liked guy. So you could see some disruption to the defense, but scheme-wise, I think they're going to pretty much run it back.
Yeah, leaning on Ken Dorsey, obviously, to be able to really just handle the offense, where McDermott's going to have, obviously a little bit more lean and defensive responsibilities going in. So it's definitely interesting to watch, but I wouldn't expect any major changes there. Carolina obviously has, changed everything across the board. Frank Wright comes in. I don't know that I would say surprising that he was let go, but again, not surprising that he got a job immediately. It's clearly butting heads in terms of what to do at the quarterback position. Just kind of the first time that they had really stumbled since Frank Wright had been there. and again, it deserves a lot of credit for, Philly winning that first Super Bowl a handful of years ago. Brings over Thomas Brown, who had been with the Rams the last couple of years, but this will be Frank Reich's offense. Thomas Brown will be offensive coordinator by name. And Ejiro Evero, who's been, he got a number of head coaching interviews. He was the defensive coordinator with Denver last year. He interviewed for a lot of these jobs, but decided to stay and be the defensive coordinator again, give it one more year. And again, a nice young defense that could be pretty exciting here. Clark, I'll kick you to you with Carolina.
Yeah, Ejiro Evero did such a good job with Denver last year, and there was a moment, not only did he get head coaching interviews, he was offered the interim head coaching job in Denver when they fired Hackett, and he declined, which I thought was a really interesting move because he didn't want to be head coach of a crappy team and like get all that kind of bad juju and whatever. He was like, I'm going to wait until I'm ready and to like take over as head coach. I just thought that was a really cool like character move on his part. And so I'm optimistic about his role. He knows what he has to do. He's got some talent on the Panthers defense. As far as the offense goes, Frank Reich has such a good reputation and gets a lot of respect. I'm just not sure that I've seen that evidence on the field. Like I said, my judgment of coaches is based on what I see on the field. And I'm not sure that I've seen much in Indianapolis that makes me super excited about him. But there's a lot of smart people that really, really like him. So this is a team that I have wide ranges of outcomes on going into the season. So it'll be a team that I adjust rapidly to when I see the evidence on the field, whether that's up or downside.
Yeah. To be fair, and then Connor, your thoughts. Frank Reich was getting basically every quarterback's last year, rotating door there too. So it's really hard to implement stuff. What are your thoughts on the Carolina stuff, Connor?
Yeah, I think, Frank Reich, you got to kind of go back to like Philly to really see anything valuable, I think, because there wasn't a whole lot there in Indy. But I do think, kind of like we mentioned earlier with, some of the issues in Arizona here, Thomas Brown, I think, really will be able to lean on Frank Reich in this specific spot. He also mentioned that they're going to be running like an RPO heavy offense, which doesn't necessarily mean read options with a smaller guy like Bryce, where the quarterback obviously has the option of handing it off or running himself. I just think it's going to be a lot of maybe handoff or a quick throw, and I think that's an important differentiation because I think sometimes when people hear RPOs, I think a lot of quarterback running, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case for a guy like Bryce. So, like looking at this offense specifically, I'm not entirely sure what to expect because that hasn't really been Frank Reich's MO either. So I think it's going to be kind of an interesting blend of everything. I'm, cautiously optimistic, I would say. And then Evero, I struggle with these kinds of coordinators because I think that there is a lot of talent on Denver's defense. And so I don't know whether to attribute that to the defensive coordinator or to the actual talent. But like Clark said, like you saw them play good. So we can't really say anything other than like he's probably a good defensive coordinator. I think a great example of this in the past was like Adam Gase, who, was the quarterback whisperer in Chicago, then became a head coach in New York, and it was like an absolute disaster. So I don't know. I think there's various examples on either side, but like parsing through whether it was the talent or the coach is like one of the more fun, I guess, tasks and something that is, I think, pretty difficult, honestly.
It is. I think the jump from coordinator to head coach is completely different because really you're the leader of the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Where we've seen historically a bunch of guys, even going back to like the Dave Wanstedts of the world, like fantastic coordinator, and then he gets a head coaching job and it just doesn't work. And then they try it again after he is great as a coordinator. Wade Phillips. There's just been a bunch of guys over the last 30, 40 years in the NFL that just are great at their job, but when they have to get up and really lead the team or do all the stuff that involves being a head coach in the league, definitely a different task. So your point on Evero is correct, right? He was part of the Rams defense back when that was successful, pivots over to Denver, talent remains really high. And in Carolina, he's also now acquiring a pretty loaded, young, talented defense there. So set up for success and will probably be making the circuit as far as head coaching jobs next year as well.
But the Broncos did have a bunch of defensive injuries last year and maintained their level of play outside of getting absolutely torched by Baker Mayfield and the Rams. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was talent, but he also definitely made the most out of it.
Yeah, all the kids had to watch that one on Nickelodeon. That was the, or isn't that like the Christmas Eve Nickelodeon game or something like that?
Yeah, the what do they call it? Like, not Splash Bowl or whatever, something like that. But it's,
Slime Bowl.
Slime Bowl, that's what it is.
Yeah. All right, Dallas. Kellen Moore had to get out of there. He's trying to score too many points. Brian Schottenheimer is in, although this is going to be a Mike McCarthy-led offense in terms of play calling. Connor, what are your thoughts on Dallas's moves here in the offseason?
Yeah, I found this one specifically interesting considering Brian Schottenheimer was fired in Seattle for throwing too much, like midway through the season previously. And so what is interesting, though, is he was an offensive analyst for the Cowboys like last year. And so my guess is that him and McCarthy just became buddy-buddy. And he was kind of like, hey, like, just hire me. Like, we'll do it your way. And so I think that it's going to be that, because I think maybe Shoddy learned his lesson, like, when he clashed with Pete Carroll, where he was just trying to, they were putting up points, but like, again, their defense wasn't good enough to like hang around. And so Pete Carroll viewed that as like we can't do this. Like, this is not a viable thing for us to win games. And so I'm interested to see how I would say almost certainly we're going to see another clash. Like I would say that it's probably going to happen at some point in this season, but unless he just gives like McCarthy's offense and like Shoddy's just there, like in name, basically.
I think that's kind of what it's going to be. Clark, what are your thoughts?
I have two reasons for some optimism here. The first is having Tony Pollard as the running back, I think, is a massive upgrade. And so if they want to run the ball, they at least have a good offensive line and a fantastic running back to do it with. The second thing is Kellen Moore had some strengths in game planning, in the sense that he would tailor each week's game plan to the specific opponent, which was impressive. But I feel like he maybe overdid it. So like he would stubbornly be like, today we're just going to run the ball all day. Today we're only going to pass because this defense is really good against the run. And I think what ends up happening when you play only to the weaknesses of your opponents is you don't have a plan A. Everything is a reaction. And so when they would get into the playoffs, there wasn't like okay, game's on the line, we just need to beat us and like win this game. And so that's what part of the reason why I think they've struggled historically in the playoffs. So I think maybe Schottenheimer and McCarthy can at least identify like, this is what we want to do as an offense. And if they're able to identify who they are, they'll at least have a plan A that they can go into games with and try to dictate rather than react. So that could be a positive in the long run.
If Dak had played the full game against Tampa, I think he would have ended up with like the last 2 years, like over 100 pass attempts in those two games combined, something like that, like outrageous. Because that was like the clear like run funnel or pass funnel defense of all time, like the last 2 years. And they just threw it every single play.
Yeah, 2 years ago, remember that opening night game where they just chucked it like every single time, and people were losing their mind, like, oh, this is what Dallas is going to be this year. And it's like, this is not necessarily what Dallas is going to be all year. It was the right time to do that. So yeah, to Clark's point, kudos to your offensive coordinator not being, all right, this is my system, this is what we're doing. We need to be able to be pliable depending on what our opponent does really well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I do think it's going to be a heavy load of what McCarthy wants to do there as well. All right, Denver. Sean Payton comes to town, gets the bag, 5 for 90, along with a bunch of draft picks. They have now given up 6 combined first or second round picks in the last couple of years to land Sean Payton and Russ. Joe Lombardi comes over after being a coordinator for a couple of years in LA with the Chargers. Again, much maligned for any Justin Herbert fans out there. It was very frustrating about how Lombardi used him a little bit. But again, these two spent a lot of time together. Lombardi was basically on Payton's staff in New Orleans for like 10 out of 12 years or something like that. Defensive coordinator Vance Joseph comes along as well. Kudos to Vance Joseph for, he was the head coach here a couple of years ago. To come back and take a defensive coordinator job and not be too prideful to do that is, I think, speaks to his character as well. Clark, I'll give you the floor first to talk about the Broncos.
This is a super interesting one, probably the most interesting. I did a bunch of research last offseason on Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett, and the biggest takeaway I came into the season with was how awful of a fit they were. Like, Russell Wilson is reliant on the deep ball, really tries to push it downfield. It doesn't make good decisions in the quick, short game. Like, he doesn't respond well, and that's probably what his biggest problem was last year. Whereas Nathaniel Hackett was all about the short game, the quick decisions, the Aaron Rodgers style offense. And Sean Payton's the same way. And Joe Lombardi's the same way. Like, Drew Brees was the absolute master at taking what the defense gives. Like, if the defense blitzes, he knows exactly where to put it and can put it there perfectly. Russell Wilson, not the case. So I'm really curious as to how this sort of blend is going to work. Last year, Russell Wilson showed no inclination of changing his style of play. No matter how many defenses ran those too high shells and took away the big plays, he just continued to try to force it. And that led to a bunch of sacks and a bunch of bad plays. I don't think that Sean Payton is going to fix Russell Wilson. That's my ultimate stance. I bet the Broncos to miss the playoffs last year. I haven't bet it this year, but I'm because Sean Payton is frankly better than Nathaniel Hackett. I still just don't think it's a good fit. And I'm very pessimistic that this is going to work out well for the Broncos this year.
Clark lives in Colorado. I think only one of us on the panel here has a Broncos starter jacket, and that's Connor Allen. Connor, what are your thoughts on the Broncos moves?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic than Clark. Not necessarily for, I would say, great reasoning, but I think that I just think I'm a big believer in Sean Payton's coaching. I think that Joe Lombardi was just like a legitimately horrendous fit for Justin Herbert in a lot of ways, just because of it's like keeping a Ferrari in a garage, I would say, in some senses. And part of that had to do with personnel, obviously, of who they had on the field. But, I just think at this point, I would say Russell Wilson might be a slightly better, fit. But at that point, to Clark's point, Russell Wilson was kind of at his best, it's like a lot of running, play action, and those perfectly thrown deep balls. And so that's not exactly what we saw in Sean Payton's offense with Drew Brees. But maybe he's able to tailor that a little bit more to Russ. Maybe Sean Payton, a little bit of time off is kind of able to change the offense a little bit and just has worked with a shorter quarterback in the past and kind of can understand what will work and just what straight up can't work and what it needs to happen. And if it doesn't, he's already suggested that he's open to making a quarterback change. He's already said hey, bring in Jarrett Stidham. If it doesn't work out with Russ, we're going to just move on. And I kind of like that level of confidence in their own system. Maybe it's, unwarranted, but I don't know. I'm kind of interested. And I think that it'll be a massive test of whether or not Sean Payton's actually a fantastic coach.
It's going to be a fun one to watch. I think Vance Joseph is a great example of what we were talking about earlier, right? Where he, 2 seasons, they won 5 games and 6 games and he got ousted as the head coach. But that Arizona defense was not one of the worst in the league. And it probably should have been just on paper the last couple of years. And he did a really good job. Again, also being pliable when you look at what they've done over the last couple of years. It really ranged in terms of, pre-snap formations, blitz rates, all those things were not very, sticky. They tended to be, game plan dependent. So Vance Joseph is a guy that I think is probably a really good defensive coordinator. And again, in a spot where they have a lot of talent there still defensively, I think he was a nice addition there to come into that staff. And again, while the offense kind of figures out the bumps in the road, I think the defense is going to be able to kind of, buoy them and keep them competitive a little bit along the way. Texans are next. Another cleaning of house. D'Amico Ryans comes in after being a defensive coordinator with the Niners. Obviously, a former Texan himself, brings along Bobby Slowick, which is a very interesting story. Bobby Slowick had been he worked actually first connected with Shanahan. Again, obviously, this San Francisco ties here with Ryans back in Washington a long time ago, and then had a couple years off. He worked for PFF for 3 years, then got scooped back up by Shanahan when he went to San Francisco and has worn many hats. And last year was the passing game coordinator, and then also Matt Burke, this guy's been in the league for 20 years. I was looking at he's basically trying to work for every team in the league. So congratulations to the Burke family. It looks like you're going to be at least in Houston for at least 2 years. That's not something that's been very common for the Burke household. But Connor, what are your thoughts on D'Amico Ryans here in Houston?
Yeah, so this kind of made me a little bit more optimistic in the whole. So the defensively, I don't really think Burke is necessarily a very good defensive coordinator.
It won't even matter. It
doesn't even matter.
Yeah,
exactly. So if you look at Burke's metrics, he was at DC for 2 years. They were bottom 5 in every metric, 2 straight years. Points allowed, whatever, yards, if that's what you care about. It's just an easy overview of they probably weren't a very good defense. But then if you look at Bobby Slowick, I think Slowick is really interesting. So obviously the Shanahan tree is important, but when you look at what CJ Stroud is able to do and the common knock on, Ohio State quarterbacks is hey, Ohio State, there's running crossers, there's guys open all the time. That's exactly what the Shanahan thing, play action crossers is that is exactly what they're able to do. And I'm okay, well, they added a little bit of talent. Mechie's coming back. The offensive line should be okay. If CJ Stroud is anything, I'm not saying this offense is going to be good, but I mean, they might not be like bottom 5 anymore. Like, I mean, they might be like, middle of the pack. And I think that would be a massive step up for them if those things play out. Obviously, now that there's a lot of assumptions being made in there, but it made me just a little bit more interested in this offense where I already thought there was a couple pieces. Now at this point, like if you add in a guy who maybe we don't know about, he's also another guy though, who is on a pillar. He has nothing to lean on. It's going to be all Bobby Slowick show in town. So we'll see how it works, but I think it's a little bit more volatile than most people are giving credit towards.
Yeah, the offensive line's good too. So yeah, I do think I think it could be a step forward here offensively. They don't really have a number 1 receiver. It's basically 3 number 3s. Nico Collins. Like the last couple of days, we've been seeing a lot of Tank Dell stuff. Like Stroud and Dell are so excited. He played in Houston, staying in Houston. Really small but very exciting prospect when the ball's in his hands. And then as you mentioned, Michi coming back from
Bobby Trees, bro. Bobby Trees is
Bobby Trees. Yeah, you're right.
Bobby Trees.
Like, so
he's like
Dalton Schultz came over as well. So not great talent, but better talent for sure, right?
It's kind of like the Jags though. Like, I mean, they added a bunch of like, well, I guess these guys are worse than the Jags, but I mean like below average guys who like kind of like, help
last
a
year's
little bit.
Jags.
Yeah, last year's Jags.
Yeah. Clark Houston, what are your thoughts?
I think anytime you have a first-time head coach, first-time offensive coordinator, first rookie quarterback, I don't see how anyone can have a strong opinion on who the Texans are going to be this year.
Yeah.
What I like about D'Amico Ryans is his defense in San Francisco wasn't just based on talent. Like, yes, they had a bunch of talent, obviously. But when you watch every snap like I do, you see the level of intensity that the players play with. And the number one thing that I took away from watching the San Francisco defense was how quickly and how aggressively they tackled. They gang tackled on every single play. It made it so hard for teams to, turn screen passes into gains, to run the ball, all those kinds of things. And to me, that speaks to a willingness of the players to play hard for D'Amico Ryans. And I don't know how that's going to translate to being a head coach, but I think I'm thinking optimistically because that sort of like, intangible leader of men quality is really important to get your team's buy-in and get their best effort on the field. And I think D'Amico Ryans has that. Like, I think he can be a real leader, build some culture, in addition to implementing a strong defensive scheme. So we'll see how the offense goes. It's a complete unknown. Like you said, I think there's reason for optimism that people aren't necessarily buying into. I find myself more optimistic on the Texans overall than the market. So I'm excited to see what it looks like.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun one to watch. And again, you got a nice big contract. I think the leash is probably pretty long. And these situations where you have a defensive-minded head coach, and as Connor's talked about, these guys are kind of by themselves, offensive coordinator-wise, no one to lean on. Like Slowick can be out in the mix in terms of like head coaching rounds next year, right? If he shows that he's a guy and he can lead this offense and it can be what Connor's talking about, then all of a sudden, then you're in the same position next year trying to find, his replacement. So it definitely is an interesting dynamic in the league nowadays where I think teams are definitely looking to poach young. I think Slowick's like 35 years old. He's not an old guy. He's not been around. Those are moves that a lot of teams are looking to make nowadays. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Colts also offensively have made a change. Gus Bradley stays on as a defensive coordinator, but Shane Steichen comes over from Philadelphia, offensive coordinator there. Jim Bob Cooter, we know from his time with the Lions as the offensive coordinator, was the Jags passing coordinator last year. He's the offensive coordinator by name, but this will be a Shane Steichen offense. Talked about really and Steichen did a good job. He was in LA with the Chargers. He's been also another guy that's been able to adapt based off of the talent he has in the team. And again, it's not really hard to draw a straight line between Jalen Hurts type offense versus what we're going to expect from Anthony Richardson a little bit here when he finally takes over. Connor, what are your thoughts about Indy's move with Shane Steichen?
Yeah, I think one thing that I came across here was that I'm pretty convinced that Matt Patricia ruined Jim Bob Cooter's career because he was like a legitimate like candidate to be getting like, better jobs and like potential. I mean, maybe he had coaching mix. There's some like rumors about that when their Lions were crushing it like prior to hiring Patricia, but then, I mean, they sucked and then he got fired. And like, I blame Patricia. I think Patricia's a bum. So I think that was like entirely on him. So I'm cautiously optimistic, not to mention, like you said, it is going to be mostly Shane Steichen offense. I mean, I guess my worry is that Richardson isn't developed enough really to kind of do a lot of the stuff that we saw with Hurts. And Hurts obviously was a much better passer coming out of college, but again, Hurts played in the Lincoln Riley offense at Oklahoma, whereas, Anthony Richardson played at Florida. So it's like the parallels are there, but I think that they're a little bit messy to draw a straight line. So I would say that I'm interested, and I'm not necessarily like optimistic or pessimistic, just interested, I guess, to see what it looks like.
We thought Jalen Hurts was a bum. at Alabama.
We did.
It was not good, right?
He was horrible. He was a terrible passer. He was legitimately terrible.
Very, very limited as a passer. So the move to Oklahoma and the success there was a testament to his development, but also, I think definitely, he saw the light a little bit through a Lincoln Riley offense, and that continued in his development. Again, kudos to him for being able to work and develop and grow. So it's like, these aren't finished products at 21 years old. And I think that'll be the same for Anthony Richardson. But Clark, what are your thoughts on Indy?
Yeah, Steichen got one of the most productive rookie seasons out of Justin Herbert, and then turned Jalen Hurts into a stud quarterback. So he's got the track record, and this is kind of a win-win situation for him. If Richardson sucks, then it's kind of like, well, Richardson wasn't developed. He was too raw, he just wasn't a good quarterback, whatever. But if Richardson succeeds, it's like, well, now his resume is Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson, solidifies him as some kind of quarterback whisperer. So I think it's a good situation for Steichen. I'm optimistic. I give him some credit for what happened in Philadelphia. I think his scheme really helped Jalen Hurts. But the offensive line was really, really good. So the Colts have struggled on that front. And so I think that's going to be my biggest question is, how does the scheme account for having a weaker offensive line? Does he rely on the skills that Jalen Hurts had and the time in the pocket? If so, could be a long season for Richardson. So I'm also very interested, like Connor said.
Yeah, and we also shouldn't pretend that Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman are A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith either, right? Those are some other things that are drastically different from what he's coming into. Again, I'm planting my flag. I don't know that it's happening this year, but I believe that Anthony Richardson's got it, right? That non-quantifiable thing that is going to, right? I mean, we don't know what it is, but people have it. And I think Anthony Richardson does too. And I'm excited to see, how the next 3-4 years go. And probably doesn't get 3, right? He's probably going to be 1 or 2. If it starts to go really bad after late in 1 and he doesn't have it in the second year, it's kind of the way the world works nowadays.
I'm just stoked to bet some Anthony Richardson passing unders. Honestly, 150 yards week 1, I'm going under. He's not gonna they're just not gonna he's not gonna be able to throw right away. So I'm pumped. I'm really excited. Honestly, I don't want to bet a full season under just because the number is 2,800, so it's aggressively low, but
it's low.
I'd consider it.
Yeah. It'd be fun to watch. I'm telling you, it's going to be fun. Kansas City made a change. I don't know if we have to really talk about it, but Matt Nagy had been there for last year as the quarterback coach. He's obviously replacing Eric Bieniemy, but again, it's his Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. Anyone have anything to add about Matt Nagy taking over as the play caller, which isn't even the case?
I think people forget that Mitchell Trubisky and the Bears offense was legitimately good in 2018 prior to Matt Nagy's fall and Mitchell Trubisky's fall. There was guys running consistently wide open, and they were legitimately decent. So, no, he cannot tank Patrick Mahomes in the Chiefs offense. They'll be just fine.
They'll be fine. All right, the Chargers, again, made a coordinator change. 2 of them. Kellen Moore, as we referenced earlier with Dallas, has come in as the offensive coordinator. We talked about some of the things that Moore did really well his time in Dallas, basically always among the league leaders in terms of points per game. They played fast. They ran a ton of no huddle. Shout out to Pat Thorman, had a great tweet kind of just compiling everything that happened when Dak was in the lineup and Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator. This was one of the best offenses in the league. We know the Chargers have the talent to step in and be there. And if we can get, again, a little bit more than that, Ferrari in the garage type of scenario that we keep talking about, what Lombardi did with Justin Herbert, it's going to be an exciting offense to watch. Derek Ansley was the defensive back coach. He takes over as the defensive coordinator. Again, Brandon Staley will be still calling plays defensively. Interesting, Ronaldo Hill, who was the defensive coordinator last year, is now the passing game coordinator in Miami. So switching sides of the ball. But Clark, I'll kick it to you. You've been very bullish on the Chargers. And what are your thoughts about Kellen Moore?
I'm excited about Kellen Moore. For all the reasons you just mentioned, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I do want to talk a little bit about Brandon Staley, which I know is outside the purview, but the hate for Brandon Staley is pretty intense, man, especially among some sharp bettors that I know. And I just don't really understand it. People will say I'm not going to bet the Chargers because of Brandon Staley. I don't trust him as a head coach, but last year they won 10 games and made the playoffs with massive injury impacts that lost them several games. So first of all, they were pretty good last year, even despite whatever ineffectiveness you think he has. And then 2, it's the criticisms are things like, well, he played his starters deep into week 18, and shouldn't have. And it's okay, but I don't see how that changes how a team plays. A head coach's job is to get the team to play well. Those kinds of personnel decisions aren't really factoring into my handicaps. And then the last thing is like, he was super aggressive when he came out as a head coach, like going for it on fourth down, too much, frankly. And then he kind of pulled back. Like, obviously someone in management was like, hey, you need to take it easy. He pulled back a little bit too far last year. But the thing about it is, like, fourth down decision-making is so fluid, like game to game, it changes, moment to moment, it changes. Like, I'm not relying on him making bad decisions or good decisions. I'm just saying, how well is he preparing his team? And his defensive game plans got better over the course of the year. Like, I remember specifically, he did a really good job against Tua and the Dolphins that most defenses had struggled with. He like really caused them problems. So I think he's starting to get comfortable in his role as defensive coordinator. And with Kellen Moore, a competent offense coordinator, I think he can kind of let Kellen Moore run the offense with Justin Herbert and have a little bit more synergy there. And he can focus on the defense. So I'm optimistic on both sides of the ball with the Chargers. And I think Kellen Moore is an addition, and I think Brandon Staley's underrated. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, they just need to stay healthy. Right, we'd be really interested to see what happens with this team, given the roster on both sides of the ball, if they're able to stay healthy. Should be fun to watch. I think it is kind of a make or break season though for Staley. If they can't really take the next step, I think it's going to be one of those spots where he could be looking out. All right, Rams. Liam Cohen went back as the offensive coordinator. Went back to Kentucky and left a void there again, knowing that this is still Sean McVay's offense. This is what Sylvie would always talk about, the cocoon. Mike LaFleur booted from the Jets as the offensive coordinator, slides right back in with his buddy Sean McVay. But again, Sean McVay's offense here, similar to Matt Nagy. Anyone have any Mike LaFleur thoughts?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's McVay's offense. And again, like I'm not going to put either of you on the spot. And this is not necessarily something you spend a ton of time digging into. I challenge anyone who's listening. Name a defensive starter for the Rams other than Aaron Donald. Second, name two. You cannot do it. This is by far the worst defense in the league. They're going to be using a bunch of rookies. If they have, it is a disaster defensively for the Rams. I promise you cannot name a second guy. It's really, really, really bad. So yeah, before I got dug into it and started doing some like tackles work the other day, I could only think of one. So, and again, I spend my hands in the dirt all year long. It's a very, very rough defensive year for the Rams. So, all right, let's see. Next, the Dolphins. Dolphins made a change at defensive coordinator. Vic Fangio comes over. Josh Boyer was a holdover that we talked about it last year. Like there were rumblings. The team was not very excited that he stayed on, after Brian Flores left. But there are some commonalities to what Flores and Boyer did with what Fangio does. And then there are some drastic differences in terms of scheme, in terms of how frequently they played single high, how frequently they play too high, like literally the opposite. Light box, stack boxes, like they could not be more different. So I'm very excited about what happens here with this Miami defense. They also are loaded talent-wise at all three levels. We talked about this a little bit in our future show, wanting to get in on Miami. It's really hard to not be bullish and encouraged about what this offense can do if Tua is able to stay on the field. They improved, I think, with Mike White in terms of the backup job there. But the defensive side, they can do really anything they want. I mean, adding Jalen Ramsey, who will play outside in two receiver sets, but has done a lot of damage in terms of being the slot corner the last couple of years. They added Cam Smith in the draft, who was really good at South Carolina. His film was really good. It didn't test well, so he slid a little bit in the draft. But like to be able to have Xavier Howard, Cam Smith, and be able to put Ramsey. They also have Kader Kua. Like they have a really nice secondary. They added David Long. They added Deshaun Elliott. This defense is going to be really good. And Fangio has been a winner. Basically another guy that probably fits the mode that we're talking about earlier. He's just probably a defensive coordinator more so than a head coach. I'll let you go, Connor. What are your thoughts about Miami and Vic Fangio?
100%. I'm a big Vic Fangio guy. If we go back to his time in Chicago, it was another one of those things where they had legitimately like the worst or like bottom three defensive talent in the league, and they were like fine. They were average. And so to me, that proved a lot. Obviously, he might not be a head coach kind of guy. Like if he can focus on the defense, I'm really excited about what he can do here, especially given all the talent that they have. So I think he is like a massive addition for them. In addition, obviously, all the other talent as well. One of the many reasons we like the Dolphins this year.
Yeah. What do you got, Clark?
Yeah, there's two defensive coordinators this year that I immediately upgrade the defense just by having him in charge, and this is one of them. Vic Fangio is an upgrade schematically and coaching wise. We'll see how that looks like on the field. Like I'll adjust based on what we see as always, but Vic Fangio's schemes are top notch, and he knows what he's doing. And I'm excited for the Dolphins defense.
Yep, still going to see a ton of man rate. I mean, Fangio, his last year in Denver, they led the league in man rates. Miami was top 5 in man rate last year, so we'll see that. But a lot of the other stuff is going to look very different, and the talent upgrade at all 3 levels is pretty drastic. Same thing can be said for Minnesota. I'm interested if this is the other one for Clark. Minnesota making a defensive coordinator change here. Ed Donatel out after his 1 year with Kevin O'Connell. Flores spent last year with Pittsburgh in terms of coaching the linebackers, but also again, very, very different in terms of what he did at Miami. Minnesota played almost exclusively zone last year. They played more zone than anyone else, barely played any man, were very vanilla. Flores likes to mix it up a little bit. They will play a lot of man. They will blitz you in terms of light box, heavy box, stack box stuff, very, very different. So a little bit more exciting, I think, for Minnesota this year defensively. Clark, what are your thoughts on Flores?
As a bettor, I'm disappointed because the Vikings defense was one of the easiest units to read in the league last year. They'll give you what you want. So if you have a methodical offense that can capitalize against a soft passive zone, then you're going to do just fine against the Vikings, Cowboys. But so I'm sad to be missing that. But as far as if I'm a Vikings fan, which I'm not, but if I was, I'd be super excited. Brian Flores is a great coach, great defensive coordinator. What he was able to do in Miami with, kind of meh talent was a testament to his schemes, and it is very aggressive. So what I'm going to be looking for with this defense in particular is trying to identify when they're playing against a vulnerable passing attack, that vulnerable to pressure, maybe not making quick decisions. So rookie quarterbacks and experienced quarterbacks, bad offensive lines, immobile quarterbacks. I think that this defense could cause those kinds of teams much more problems and take some of the weight off the Vikings offense having to win every game. So I'm optimistic about the Vikings and specifically about the scheme changes. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah. Connor, what do you have to add?
Honestly, not much other than my only worry with the Vikings would be that they don't have the talent. If he can, that's still obviously the question. If he can maximize what he has, I think it's reason to be optimistic. But sometimes it's just you don't have enough talent. There's just nothing you can do.
Yeah, they will be banking on a number of first and second year guys defensively. So it is going to be a little bit of a change for Minnesota there. Next, New England. Look, Bill O'Brien comes back. Bill O'Brien spent 6 years in New England, mostly 2007 to 2012. Penn State, obviously the run in Houston, the general manager in Houston for a number of years, which is crazy. His last couple of years in Alabama. Look, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be a massive upgrade, even if you think Bill O'Brien is a complete donkey, because the Joe Judge, Matt Patricia stuff was just abysmal. Now, again, it also doesn't matter here a ton because New England just doesn't have top level competitive offensive playmakers. Even if Mac Jones takes a step forward, Connor, what are your thoughts on Bill O'Brien coming back?
Yeah, I think it's easy to project a step forward, but then when you take a step back and consider what they have, Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, Juju Smith-Schuster, the offensive line is probably gonna be fine. It's just one of those things where I don't know if Bill O'Brien, we talked about Todd Monken, Todd Monken was dealing with the guys who are not really NFL talent for the most part, outside of the offensive line and the defense, which he wasn't really in charge of for the most part. Now we have Bill O'Brien, who's had a constant stream of NFL talent for the last few years of high end, Jameson Williams, Devonta Smith. Mechie was a baller in college. These legitimately awesome guys. And now he has to work with, Mac Jones, who was good, but again, with those guys, with legitimate top end talent. Now he's a bunch of bums. So I think he can take a step forward, but it's just there's nothing else to help. If he doesn't, if the Bill O'Brien thing doesn't work out, it's not going to be as bad as last year, but it's still not going to be great.
Again, I will say that the New England talent is better than last year. It's still just not really competitive in terms of what's going on in the AFC, what's going on just in the AFC East. Again, you need Tyquan Thornton to step into a big second year here. This is kind of where the Patriots are at. Clark, what are your thoughts on B.O.B. going back to New England?
It falls into the same category as the Falcons defense in that it's going to be better just because of how it works. When you have that bad of an offensive coordinator, anyone's going to be an improvement. So I expect some regression towards the mean, but overall I agree with Connor that the talent is going to limit the upside.
Yep. The Jets next. More cocoon going on here. Nathaniel Hackett comes over to be the offensive coordinator. Basically, I think is a recruiting tool for Aaron Rodgers. And congratulations, it worked. Any thoughts here, Clark, on Nathaniel Hackett? And it's obviously just going to be Aaron Rodgers' offense. What we saw in Green Bay when he was there with Hackett.
It helps that, they have some familiarity. Like, you always expect some growing pains when a new coordinator hooks up with a new quarterback, but they should hit the ground running to a certain extent. I know that there's a big angle of like, well, Aaron Rodgers sucks in week one. It's like, well, that was the last 2 years, but if you look back further, he's actually been fine. So I think that's just more noise than signal. So I expect quick clicking between the two, and they'll be as good as they're going to be pretty early in the season.
Yeah, tough schedule for the Jets, along with everyone else in the AFC East. Connor, what are your thoughts on Hackett and the Jets?
Yeah, the Todd Downing hire to be passing game coordinator and Nathaniel Hackett to be OC might have been the worst combo hire in the league by far, I would say, but I just don't think it matters because Rodgers is there. So, like, if it was anyone else, I'd be like, holy shit, this offense is going to be terrible. But it's not. So maybe we just got to roll with Aaron Rodgers.
The Eagles are going to be an interesting case. Obviously, we've already talked about both of their coordinators taking head coaching jobs. So they've had to make some additions. Brian Johnson, who is really close with Jalen Hurts, is the quarterback coach here, is taking over as the offensive coordinator. Again, we know Nick Sirianni very much involved in terms of what's going on the offensive side of the ball. And then Sean Desai comes over from Seattle. He had got most of his pro reps in terms of his coaching with the Bears. He was originally hired with the Mark Trestman group, stayed on through John Fox, through Matt Nagy, and then moved when, Nagy moved on, took over last year as the assistant head coach in Seattle, helping on the defensive side. But again, like, the talent is there. Can these guys come in and really not rock the boat? And maybe even Desai add something here, Clark, because we kind of agree with you. Like, Jonathan Gannon was pretty vanilla in terms of what they did, pre-snap and even after the snap.
Yeah, I expect there to be room for improvement. What we didn't see much last year was the Eagles' defense getting exposed by good quarterbacks. We saw it in the Super Bowl. We saw it like a couple times throughout the year, but they just didn't really play that many teams that had a good offense. When they finally played the Niners, they didn't have a quarterback. So I think there's room for the Eagles' defense to be better. But they also kind of hit the nuts last year with their record, with the schedule, with getting to the Super Bowl. So I think having continuity at head coach and quarterback and so many key leadership positions, center, Kelsey's a big part of that team. Even defensively, there's a lot of guys there that are good. I think that mitigates some of the potential downside from switching both coordinators up after a Super Bowl run. So I'm expecting pretty much continuity in the net. Schedule will get tougher, so they might not have as good of a record, but they should be probably just as good of a team.
Yeah, Clark makes a good point, Connor. This is an unusual situation to have both of these coordinators make moves. But again, I think it's probably either, a wash, or I think there's actually upside defensively, as Clark's saying. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a little bit more pressure on Desai, honestly, just because you're looking at Brian Johnson was the quarterback's coach. Near Sirianni was mostly an offensive guy. And, I think Desai's a little bit more on an island. That being said, they have plenty of talent, and, I think that they're going to be fine. I mean, maybe there's some upside, but like versus last year, I think they're almost bound to be a disappointment in terms of like overall statistics, just because of how, again, like the schedule they played, how well they played, like all those things. Like, it's almost impossible for them to play that well again, I think. And so there will be some level of like letdown, I think, almost certainly. I mean, if they're like, fringe top 10 instead of like fringe top 3, which is like what the most metrics suggested last year.
Yeah, when you get to the quarterback that frequently, and then not just get there, but actually get home and get the sacks, it's going to be really hard for them to replicate that. But I think some of the other stuff in terms of pass defense, like you can get to them over the middle. Both linebackers were not very good in coverage. Now, again, they've had a lot of change in the middle of the field too, so it's going to be interesting to see how that works in the first year. But yeah, I don't think that the Eagles really skip a beat here. I think they're still going to be one of the best. The Niners obviously had to make a defensive coordinator change because their DCs keep getting plucked for head coaching jobs. Steve Wilkes, who probably should have got a head coaching job, did a tremendous job making Carolina relevant after they moved on last season, comes in and replaces D'Amico Ryans. Connor, what are your thoughts on Steve Wilkes?
Honestly, not a ton. It seems like when they had talent, like they were good. Like, I mean, early in the season before JC Horn got injured, it was like, they've been good throughout certain times. It's just like one of those things that, I don't know, like he just doesn't move the needle for me. I don't know. I mean, any thoughts on your end? I feel like you probably know better. Like he's just kind of like a meh hire to me.
Well, I mean, they have a ton of talent still, and that makes things way easier. But again, I like
Right.
what they were able to get out of the defensive side of the ball in Carolina last year. Pretty young defense, and I think that was really spearheading their turnaround. Again, Sam Darnold took over, didn't turn the ball over. They played good defense and stayed in games. Like they've always, the last couple of years, like their front seven is tremendous. The back half is always questionable to me going into the season, but they always seem to outperform. So there definitely is something there coaching wise. So we'll need that out of Wilkes again. Clark, what are your thoughts on the Wilkes hire?
Yeah, he doesn't move the needle much for me either, and D'Amico Ryans did. So
Yeah.
it's a potential downgrade. Like what we got out of the 49ers defense last year was phenomenal. So the bar is so high that he's going to have to be really, really good for the Niners to be as good as they were last year.
Yeah, questions going in last year with the young secondary, but all those guys really performed. They stayed healthy, and if they could do that again, I think they're going to be in the mix. Again, if they can get anything out of the quarterback position. Tampa Bay makes a change at offensive coordinator with Dave Canellis coming in for Byron Leftwich. Canellis has been a part of I don't even say tree, like he's been with Pete Carroll all the way back to USC. They wore many hats on the offensive side of the ball in Seattle. Last year was the quarterback coach. Again, being a part of Geno Smith coming out of nowhere and having a great year puts you on some radars, and they got himself an offensive coordinator position. Clark, what are your thoughts on Canellis here moving on to Tampa Bay?
No real priors on this. I mean, new quarterback, new coordinator again, massive variance. Baker Mayfield has bounced around the league. If it's him starting, I'm excited to see him in a fresh start with good receivers. And if this, Dave Canales guy can get the most out of Baker Mayfield, I think they can be a competent offense. I think there's an upside to this Bucs team that I think nobody's talking about. I'm not betting it, but I think it's there. And I think that I'm more reserving my judgment on the Bucs, whereas I think a lot of people are just kind of writing them off.
I wrote them off, Connor. What are your thoughts on Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic. I just think the offensive line is going to cause a lot of issues. And so if the offensive line isn't even competent, which I think we're projecting it, at least most places have it kind of a little bit lower tier. I worry. I also don't think Rachaad White is very good. I don't think the running game is very good. So it's going to put a lot of stress on the passing game. Now, that being said, if the passing game is good, none of the rest of that matters. So, but Canellis is another island coach here. I'll coin it. Like Todd Bowles is a big defensive coordinator, or big defensive guy. I think that he's really good defensively, to be fair. I think that he kind of got a bad rap in his last, stint, but it's like, I think he's a legit good defensive guy. It's just a matter of whether or not the offense can do anything with Canellis. So yeah, I would say maybe I should be a little bit more open-minded, but I worry a little bit about the offensive line.
Yeah, Baker was bad last year. If you go up full sample of what he did in terms in time in Carolina, and then if you even break it down when he was at the Rams, it was still comfortably, bottom fourth quarter of the league in terms of EPA, success rate, all those things. So Tampa Bay, if they are able to avoid basically any injuries, will be, I think, competitive. They are very, very thin on both sides of the ball. And that's kind of my problem, is that they just don't have, if they lose either Jamal Dean or, trying to think of some of the other guy, like it's really thin on that side of the football. So, or Carlton Davis, the other corner, like the rest of the defense it's just not a lot behind them. So they're able to stay healthy. They probably are a little bit competitive in a wide open division. But I also have offensive line issues, like Connor mentioned, too. Concerns there. All right, Tennessee with Tim Kelly moving in, replacing Tom Downing as the offensive coordinator. Stays on. He was the passing coordinator last year with the Titans. He's been part of the Bill O'Brien tree the last handful of years. Connor, do you know where Tim Kelly got his coaching debut at?
I do not. Where did he get his coaching debut?
Illinois Wesleyan.
No shit. I should know him. That's where I went to college. Well, now I gotta do a little bit more research on him because now I'm intrigued.
Yep, you probably have statues right next to each other if you go on the campus.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of strong football coming out of Illinois Wesleyan, but hey, shout out to Tim Kelly. Now I'm a fan. I mean, now I'm all the way in. I'm buying out of my Titans unders. All in on the overs now. Yeah,
Clark, I'll kick it to you. What are your thoughts on the Titans here?
Just thoughts on. We throw around the word tanking a lot. We're like, oh, the Titans have nothing to play for. They're probably going to tank. And it's like, this guy is a first-time offense coordinator. Like, he's going to try to win. He's going to try to put on film, like, hey, look what I did with this shitty offense that you gave me. Like, I'm excited to see what he does. But my opinion on Titans don't change because he was in-house. He was, just promoted. Same head coach, same defense coordinator. So I don't materially change the Titans, but I kind of push back a little bit on the whole tanking idea.
I haven't heard any of that, and I would totally. Mike Vrabel is not wired to tank either, so I would definitely call BS on that. Connor, now that you had some time to research Tim Kelly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so he went to Eastern Illinois. He was a grad assistant at Wesleyan for a year at 2008, 2009. Still optimistic. That's great news. He's an Iowa Titan, so shout out to him. But yeah, I think Clark. I think the issue is like it's not even about like tanking. It's like if they go like 2-4 in their first 6 games before the bye because they're underdogs in every single one right now, like or they're 1-5. I mean, like they're probably gonna switch to Levis after the bye. I think it just opens up like a whole nother level that's like hard to fathom. So it's like, I mean, Henry's already on the trade block. He could get traded. If he doesn't get traded, then you're just gonna look at Will Levis, and I think that kind of alters the dynamics of kind of where they're at right now. And I mean, certainly makes them a lot more volatile. I guess it could make them better. It could also make them a lot worse offensively. So I don't know. I think that's kind of my specific handicap of the team and the whole on the season. So
last is Washington with Eric Bieniemy coming over. Again, lateral move of sorts. He did get probably a nice raise, and then he's assistant associate head coach. But I think for Bieniemy has just been a name that's been in the head coaching circles for the last couple of years, and I think just needed an opportunity to get outside of the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes shadow and say, "Hey, I'm leading this," right? Because it was just, hey, they go out and do what they're expected to do. Well, it's Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Like he was never going to be able to really get credit. There were some reports, and you would probably think there's something to it if you've had this many interviews to be a head coach and you can't really get the ball over the goal line. There's probably something there, but hopefully he can continue to develop that skill. But again, he's going to have an interesting quarterback situation here, Connor, in his first year in Washington. What are your thoughts about Eric Bieniemy?
Yeah, it was an interesting move for his career, one that obviously will, make things a little more volatile. I mean, that being said, if he fails, I'm sure that Kansas City will just hire him back in some kind of, overseeing role or something like that. Like I'm sure it'll be some kind of analyst for them and it won't matter. But like, this is definitely the next stepping stone for him. Sam Howell, I think, is probably a little bit better than most people are giving credit for. But that being said, I mean, that's, again, like a marginal, bump there, I think, relative to the market. So I don't really know entirely what to expect because we don't really know or have any sample of like how much is Andy Reid, how much is Bieniemy. Obviously, playing with the best quarterback in the NFL for your entire career helps a lot and great weapons. So like, what do we balance here? What do we weigh? For me, it's just kind of like a wait and see thing, especially given overall meh talent on the Washington, I would say, and not a very good quarterback. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect, to be honest.
Yeah, Clark, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I mean, what's the takeaway, right? Like he played with the best quarterback in the league. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid can do it with any offensive coordinator. So how much did Bieniemy contribute? And then the second thing, maybe more optimistically, is how much did he glean from that situation, right? Like what did he learn from Andy Reid? What did he learn from running that offense for so many years that he can then apply? But that's a double-edged sword, right? Because if you're expecting Sam Howell to do the things Patrick Mahomes does, then good luck. It could go up in flames, like quite frankly. He's a running back guy, so we'll see how he does in coordinating the passing game, which is my understanding was what Reid was really focused on. So a wide range of outcomes here. I'm not optimistic as a Chiefs fan. I never really felt like Bieniemy was that big of a contributor. Like it was definitely a 3-part system. All 3 of those guys had a big role in the offense, but it kind of always felt like if we're going to lose one, like it's Eric Bieniemy, right? And so by default, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Connor. I think we could see some good play out of Sam Howell. Interesting prospect who, definitely had an interesting last year in Carolina in the draft, before coming over, and I don't know, just haven't seen it in the NFL level. But I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, they brought in Jacoby Brissett as well. It's just interesting if they mean that, like, actually, is that an open competition or are they going with Howell? I mean, Jacoby Brissett's kind of been just like the league stopper for a year here and there, but played really well last year with the Browns. Again, like that's Kevin Stefanski offense. Again, someone that I think we should be encouraged by. But yeah, I mean, I'm just interested to see if they just say, hey, it's Sam Howell no matter what, or what happens there in the preseason. So that one's going to be quite interesting. So that wraps it up with the coaching changes. I appreciate you guys hanging with us here again. New YouTube page, 4for4 bets, rate, review, subscribe. We appreciate that. Podcast do the same. Get the betting sub by just for $5. Download Vivid Picks. Use promo code 4for4 bets. And you'll get an email from us on how to activate your betting subscription for 3 months. Or you can just go over to 4for4.com/plans, get the full year, take care of it, get everything you need there. So good stuff as always from Clark and Connor. We'll see you guys next time with who knows, but we'll see you. Thanks for joining us.